I've been thinking a lot recently about what it means to be tough. Because I feel like the word tough is one that we're hearing a lot, right? Everyone on TV, all the politicians and the pundits and the experts and everybody, they say these are tough times. They say it's tough to know when all this will be over, and we get a lot of, we're going to have to be tough, or we're just going to have to tough it out a while longer. So I've been thinking about this word. One of the side effects of growing up as the sensitive, artsy type is I have never exactly been what we might traditionally think of as tough. So throughout my life, I have sometimes tried to surround myself with tough people. There's this really excellent picture from about 10 years ago. You'll know it's from about 10 years ago because it was the last time that I didn't have a beard. And it's this picture of me outside of a poetry reading in New Hampshire. And I have these two friends on either side of me, one of whom was a bouncer and the other of whom was a linebacker. And I had them pose like they were my bodyguards and felt pretty good about it. Because this is a digital service, we can actually show you that picture right now. So even besides the guys in this picture, I've known a lot of people in my life who thought of themselves as being very tough, right? I've known a few Marines. I've known a bunch of boxers. I've known a couple of Hells Angels. But by far, the toughest people who I have ever met are the nurses who work in the neonatal intensive care unit at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. When I was working at that hospital in the summer of 2015, there were a couple of times when I ended up in the NICU, and let me tell you, this crew of nurses, this group of people who are mostly women, and they take care of the smallest and most vulnerable patients in the hospital all day and all night. And they see and experience unspeakably heartbreaking things. And never once did I see one of them lose their compassion or their sense of care. They were a group of people who demonstrated this rare kind of toughness, right? This kind of toughness that's not about having the strength to dominate others, but it's more about having the strength to rise to whatever challenge is put in front of you and to bring the people around you along with you and to not leave anyone behind. It's a kind of toughness that requires a person to know how to be strong and also how to be gentle and kind at the same time. And that kind of toughness is a big part of what we celebrate on Mother's Day because it is a kind of toughness that many of us associate with the people who have been mothers to us in our lives, whether those people are our biological mothers or women who have come into our lives in other ways. And this is why I love Mary Oliver's image of a black bear who is waking from her winter's hibernation and surveying the world. And she's powerful and mysterious, but she also loves the world and all of the beings in it as hard as she possibly can. This is a kind of strength and toughness that we also see in the story that we read today about the beginning of Moses' life. We begin our story with Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt. Pharaoh is an insecure and violent ruler, and he is seemingly unable to understand the needs or even see the humanity of the people around him. And he feels threatened by the presence of the Hebrew people in Egypt and by the possibility that they might someday realize that there's more of them than there is of the Egyptians and rise up to overthrow him. And so he does a profoundly horrible thing. He orders that all of the male children born to the Hebrew people should be killed when they are born. And in the long tradition of tyrannical leaders who are unwilling to do their own dirty work, he orders that the midwives who deliver the male children, Shiphrah and Puah are their names, have to be the ones who do the horrible act. But when the male babies are born, the midwives who deliver them do not harm them. Instead, Shiphrah and Puah just tell Pharaoh, look, we don't know what to tell you. These Hebrew women are so tough. By the time we got there, the baby was already born. You'll probably remember Shiphrah and Puah from the sermon that my wife, the Reverend Sandra Summers, preached here in March, which was, you might also remember that as the same sermon where she also invoked NICU nurses as the toughest people she'd ever met. We had a really great moment earlier today when I was reading her this sermon, and she kind of looked at me and said, did you listen to the sermon that I did at your church in March? And I said, I'm sorry, I didn't. I just, I was away, and then I got home, and I was up to my elbows in a pandemic. I didn't. I'm sorry. And she said, yeah, no, it's okay, but you should really listen to that before you preach this. So I did, and all I can tell you is we're married to each other and our minds work in similar ways. But in this story, it's always been interesting to me that Pharaoh orders that only the male children be killed because those are the only children who he believes might grow up and become a threat to him. And yet, literally all of the people in the story who end up thwarting his diabolical plans are women. And so Pharaoh, after the midwives don't do what he asks, Pharaoh, who is never one to take a hint, orders that the male babies be thrown into the Nile River. And so when baby Moses is born, Moses' mother, Yochebed, hides him away for 3 months. And then when she's no longer able to hide him, she puts him in a basket and leaves him floating on the banks of the Nile River. And after a while, Pharaoh's own daughter comes by, and she hears baby Moses crying, and she has him brought to her, and she falls in love with this beautiful and precious little life. And then Moses' older sister, who had been there watching the whole thing, jumps in and arranges it so that baby Moses can go back to his mother for a while, and she's going to raise him until Pharaoh's daughter is able to adopt him. And then Moses proceeds to grow up and lead his people out of oppression and into the promised land for the better part of 4 books of the Bible. But he is only able to do this because a veritable army of strong women made it happen. And then even when he does lead his people, Moses hems and haws and complains the whole time. Have you noticed this? Because all of the men in the Bible do this, right? Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, Paul, they all have so much angst all the time. Moses spends half of his book saying different things, all basically to the effect of, oh, I have to go and make another speech. This is really hard. And meanwhile, the women in his community just say, okay, we need to hide this screaming newborn for 3 months and then craft an elaborate heist to get him to safety. Done. Not to mention the Egyptian midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who disobey orders from the Pharaoh and lie to his face about it, risking their own lives to save the lives of babies born to people who they don't know and will never know. And it's no problem. They just do it. And this is where Sandra would say, Can you imagine if a male Bible character had done any of those things? Right? Because if a man in the Bible had done that, think of the praise. Think of the validation that he would get. And meanwhile, Pharaoh's daughter and Moses' sister don't even get names. They're just people who stepped in and did what needed to be done to keep this child healthy and safe. I think about the story sometimes because, like Moses, I am a man in a position of religious leadership for which I get a huge amount of credit and praise. And also like Moses, I am only in this position because many brilliant and tough women worked very hard to get me here. And it's brought home to me today on Mother's Day that there's a very long list of women who have lifted me and sometimes dragged me to this point in my life. I mean, forgetting about the two big guys in that picture from 10 years ago, when I think of the tough people who have pushed me to be where I am, I think about my mom, the Reverend Mary Harrington, and my godmother, the Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt, and my wife, the Reverend Sandra Summers, and my sister, Julia Title Esquire, and my stepmom, Margaret Marshall, and my mother's cousin, Diane Harrington Purvis, and Dr. Nancy Nienhaus of Andover Newton Theological School, and Cassandra de Alba of the Boston Poetry Slam. The list goes on and on and on. And this act of honoring and naming the women who have played this role in all of our lives and in this world, that was the original mission of Mother's Day. Cultures all over the world have always had days and rituals set aside to honor mothers and mothering. But Mother's Day, as we know and understand it, was founded in 1908 by a woman named Anna Jarvis to honor her mother, Anna Reeves Jarvis. Anna Reeves Jarvis was a peace activist and medical professional who treated soldiers on both sides of the American Civil War. And so Anna Jarvis founded this day to honor her mother and other women like her mother who worked for peace and for justice. But now, we have this more commercialized version of Mother's Day, right? With all the greeting cards and sales and all this stuff. And it got there pretty quickly to the point where, and this is true, in the 1920s, Anna Jarvis ended up staging a protest against the holiday that she had created and was arrested for that protest. And there's part of me that weirdly loves that, right? Just in the sense that Mother's Day can be such an emotionally fraught day for so many people, right? This is a day that is now understood to be a celebration of a very specific relationship in our lives, a very specific kind of relationship, right? And for some of us, those relationships have been changed or strained or broken. Some of us have never had that relationship in the way that we wanted it. And so I have to admit that somehow knowing that the foundress of Mother's Day, even she eventually struggled with it, I like that because that makes it feel okay for me to struggle with it as well. My mom died in October of 2010, and since then I've just never been sure, what to do on Mother's Day or who to call or how to feel. I think a lot of people feel that way. But what's been helpful for me is to try and think of Mother's Day as a day that's not only about greeting cards and breakfast in bed, though those things are important as beautiful. You know, Sandra and I are expecting our first child, and I'm very excited that we get to do our first Mother's Day in this new capacity. So to think of Mother's Day not just as that, but also as a day when we honor the ways in which every mom in our lives, those who we are genetically related to and all of the others, have loved us and have loved and pushed this world. I think about this organization that Church the River has partnered with a few times, Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, which is this group made up primarily of moms who are doing meaningful, hard work to curb the epidemic gun violence in our country. And so I honor them today. I think about the moms who volunteer at the Memphis LGBTQ Pride Parade to give hugs to people who might not be able to get a hug from a mom or haven't had that in a long time. I think of them doing that work, and I honor them today. And I think about my mom who was an activist and a rabble-rouser until the day she died. You know, it's funny, I was telling people about this last week. I was looking through a box of my mom's things the other day, you know, doing my pandemic spring cleaning. And I found this box of my mom's old lefty activist buttons and badges. And they all, you know, they had slogans on them. There were things like, you know, for peace and for feminism and for LGBT inclusion and against nuclear weapons and all that good stuff. But this collection of buttons and badges, they were in a box from Tiffany's, which that tells you everything you could ever need to know about my mom. And so I honor my mom today. And I think about all of this and about this Mother's Day that we are celebrating in the middle of this horrific global pandemic, when things seem rather bleak, and when we, just like the Hebrew people in the Exodus story, are also dealing with a leader who seems to care more about easing his own insecurity than he does about human lives. And so surely, this is a time when all of us are having to look within ourselves and find that strength, that toughness that was personified in Moses' mother, Yochebed, and in Moses' sister, and in Pharaoh's daughter, and in Shiphrah and Puah, and in Mary Oliver's Black Bear, and in all of the moms who have brought their love and strength into our lives and into the world. This is a moment when all of us, all people of all ages, of all gender identities, we are all being asked to honor these women by looking within ourselves and finding the strength to fight like a mom. And that doesn't mean beating somebody up. That's not the strength we need. I'm talking about the strength that it takes to save all of the Hebrew babies, no matter what crazy thing the Pharaoh says. I'm talking about the strength that it takes to hide a baby in a basket on the banks of the river and convince Pharaoh's daughter to save him. I'm talking about the kind of strength that it takes to work from home and have your children back in the house all day and have to homeschool them as well and explain to them, talk them through what on earth is happening all around us right now. That is the kind of strength that we need. That is the kind of strength that is always more impressive and more important than the strength to overpower other people, but especially so now. This is a moment that calls all of us to look around us and to honor and follow the examples of all of the women who have loved hard and worked hard to rise to the challenges that they have been given and to bring everybody along with them. Amen.